The door to my childhood home was unlocked. That was the first wrong thing. My mother had been paranoid about locks since I was 9 years old, ever since a neighbor's car got broken into on our street in Glendale. She had a deadbolt, a chain, and a little brass hook-and-eye latch that served absolutely no structural purpose, but made her feel better. For 20 years, that door had never been unlocked in the middle of the afternoon. I stood on the porch with my duffel bag and just stared at it. I hadn't called ahead. That was my plan. Surprise visit. A few days off work. I'd been covering double shifts at the clinic in Portland for 3 months straight, and I just wanted to come home, sleep in my old bed, eat something I didn't make myself. I wanted my dad's bad jokes at the kitchen table. I wanted the smell of the house. I pushed the door open. The garden was wrong too. My dad had roses along the front walk. He tended them obsessively, talked to them, named them after jazz musicians. Miles, Coltrane, Ella. They were overgrown and browning at the edges, petals scattered across the concrete. Nobody had watered them in at least 2 weeks. Inside, the house felt hollow. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. Dishes in the sink, mail piled on the table, a smell underneath everything that I couldn't name right away, but recognized somewhere in the back of my throat from working in healthcare. Neglect. That's what neglect smells like. I walked through every room. My parents' bedroom was made up too neatly, the way a hotel room looks. No one had slept there. My brother's old room, which he'd been using again since he moved back last year, had clothes on the floor and a plate with a crust of old food on the nightstand. My dad's reading chair in the corner of the living room had his reading glasses folded on the armrest. His book was face down, spine cracked, like he'd only set it down for a minute and planned to come back. He hadn't come back. I called my mother. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called my brother. Same. I stood in the middle of my parents' living room with my bag still over my shoulder, and a feeling climbing up my chest that I did not know what to do with. I knocked on the neighbor's door. Mrs. Okafor, who had lived next door since before I was born, and who knew everything that happened on our block because she sat on her porch every evening and watched the world. She opened the door, and her face did something complicated when she saw me. "Oh, sweetheart," she said. "You don't know. My father had a heart attack 11 days ago. Not a mild one. Not the kind where they keep you overnight for observation and send you home with a pamphlet about diet changes. The kind where the paramedics are doing compressions in the driveway. The kind where the neighbors come outside and stand on the sidewalk because the ambulance has been there too long." Mrs. Okafor had watched them take him. She'd asked my mother which hospital. She'd offered to come. My mother had waved her off and gotten in the car, and that was the last Mrs. Okafor had seen of any of them. I drove to the hospital in a state I can only describe as operational. I was not panicking. I was not crying. I was doing the things that needed to be done, parking the car, walking through the entrance, finding the right floor, talking to the nurse at the station. I was doing what I'd trained myself to do in emergency rooms, moving through the steps because if I stopped moving, I would fall apart on the linoleum. His name was in the system. ICU, 3rd floor. The nurse who walked me back had kind eyes, and she didn't say much, which I appreciated. She paused outside the room and said, "He's stable, but it's been a complicated 11 days. She said it carefully. The way medical people say things when they're trying to give you information without giving you too much, before you've seen it for yourself. I went in. My father is 63 years old. He coached my soccer team when I was 8. He fixed every broken thing in every house we ever lived in, always with the wrong tool, always successfully. He once drove 14 hours straight to help me move apartments because I'd asked the week before if he was busy and he'd said, "Never too busy for you, kid." He looked small in that bed. He was on a ventilator, monitors everywhere, an IV line in each arm. His color was wrong. I sat down in the chair beside him and I took his hand very carefully, the way you hold something that might break, and I talked to him for a while about nothing in particular. The drive down. The weather in Portland. The roses that needed watering. At some point, a doctor came in, and I introduced myself and asked questions in the organized clinical way I'd learned to ask questions, and she answered them clearly, the way doctors answer other medical workers. He'd had a major cardiac event. He'd been without oxygen long enough that there were concerns. He was on the ventilator because his lungs weren't fully cooperating. He was sedated. He was stable, but stable was doing a lot of work in that sentence. Who's been coming in? I asked. She paused just briefly. The first 2 days, yes. After that, another pause. We have a contact number. We've been leaving updates. I asked whose number. She showed me the form. My mother's cell phone. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a long time. Then I called my mother again. This time she picked up. There was noise in the background. Music, voices, what sounded like a restaurant or a bar. She said, "Hello?" In the bright, slightly impatient way she answers calls from numbers she should know better. "Where are you?" I said. Not a question, a pause. "Nadia? Is that?" My name isn't Nadia. My name doesn't matter to this story. What matters is the pause and what was in it. "I'm at the hospital," I said. "I'm sitting outside Dad's room." "Where are you?" Another pause, longer. Then, quietly, almost gently, like she was delivering news to me, "We're in Cancun." I had to ask her to repeat it. "We needed a break," she said. "It's been very stressful. The doctor said he was stable. He's on a ventilator, Mom," they said. Stable. Stable doesn't mean fine. Stable means he hasn't gotten worse today. Do you understand the difference? My brother got on the phone then. I could hear my mother handing it over. He said my name and I said, "How long have you been there?" "A week," he said. And then, in a voice that told me he'd already had this argument with himself and decided he was okay with how it had gone. "Look, we were all exhausted. We needed to decompress." "He's being monitored." "By strangers," I said. "By nurses who are doing their jobs, and a doctor who had to ask me who the family contact was, because the form has a number nobody has been answering." Silence. "Come home," I said. "We have 3 more days on the— Come home now." I hung up. I sat there for another few minutes. Then I went back upstairs and I sat with my dad and I held his hand and I watched the monitors. When the night nurse came on, she was a woman about my age, practical and efficient, and she checked his vitals and made notes, and on the way out, she looked at me and said, "It's good that someone's here. He does better when someone's here. They all do." She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I drove back to the house that night and I cleaned it. I needed to do something with my hands. I washed the dishes and threw away the old food and took out the garbage and watered Miles and Coltrane and Ella with a flashlight because it was past 10 o'clock by then. I made a list of what needed to happen. I'm a list person. It keeps the feeling at a manageable distance. In the morning, I went back to the hospital. My father's color was slightly better. Or I wanted it to be. The doctor said his oxygen levels had improved overnight, which was something. Small somethings accumulate. I called work and spoke to my supervisor, and she was, without hesitation, completely decent about everything. I had leave I hadn't used. She told me to take it. Then I sat down and I looked at the finances. This is the part I haven't told many people about, because it's the part that made me feel sick in a way that even the hospital hadn't quite. My father is a good man who trusted his family. He had a shared account, joint, with my mother, where his pension deposited every month. He had a smaller separate account for what he called mad money, which was basically the fund he used for new plants and secondhand jazz records and the occasional hardware store run. That account had about $400 in it. The joint account had been, I'm going to say this plainly, substantially drained. Not emptied. But between the Cancun flights, the hotel, the restaurants, the incidentals, whatever else. In the 11 days since my father had been taken away in an ambulance, the balance had dropped by more than $6,000. $6,000. My father was lying in the ICU, and his family had taken $6,000 and gone to Mexico. I am not a vengeful person by nature. I want to be clear about that. I went into healthcare because I believe in showing up for people when they're at their worst. I believe in the version of family that sits beside hospital beds. I did not make the next decision out of anger, exactly. Even though I was angry, I made it because something had to stop, and no one else was stopping it. I called the bank. My name is on that account. Has been since I was 18, when my dad added me as an authorized user because he trusted me, and because he wanted me to be able to help them if they ever needed it. He had trusted me with that access for 14 years, and I had never once used it for myself. I used it now. I didn't empty the account. I transferred the remaining balance to my father's small separate account, the one with the jazz records money. And then I called the bank again and had my mother removed as an authorized user, which I could do because my father, as primary account holder, had given me power of attorney for financial matters 2 years ago after a health scare that turned out to be nothing, but that had made him want to be organized. He had set it up. He had trusted me. I sat in the hospital parking lot and waited. It took 40 minutes. My brother called first. He wasn't calm about it. He said things I'm not going to repeat here because this is my story, and I get to decide what stays in it. The short version is, he was furious. He accused me of overreacting. He said I didn't understand what the family had been through. He said I was being controlling. I said, "Come home." My mother called right after, and she cried, which would have worked on me 6 months ago. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't realized. She said the doctors had said stable and she'd needed a break, and didn't I understand how hard this had been on her? I said, "He's your husband. Come home." She said, "How are we supposed to get home?" "You took the money." "I protected Dad's money," I said. "Your credit cards still work. Your debit cards from your personal accounts still work. You have options." There was a long silence. "You've changed," she said finally. Like this was a condemnation. "Yeah," as I said. "I have." They came home the next day. I was at the hospital when they arrived. My brother walked in first, and I could see him trying to decide whether to be angry or ashamed. And I watched him look at my father in that bed, and the decision got made for him. He sat down and he didn't say anything for a while. My mother stood in the doorway for a long moment before she came in. She looked at the monitors, at the tubes, at the way my father's chest rose and fell with mechanical assistance, and something moved through her face that I think was real. I think she hadn't let herself picture it. I think the word stable had been a shield she'd carried through the airport and through the hotel lobby and through 11 days of beach and pool bars. And now she was here, and there was no more distance between her and what she'd left. She sat in the chair on the other side of the bed, and she took his other hand. I left them alone. I walked to the end of the hallway and stood by the window and watched the parking lot below. After a few minutes, my brother came and stood next to me, and we didn't talk for a while. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said eventually. "You didn't ask," I said. He didn't argue with that. My father woke up 4 days later, not all at once. It was slow, a squeeze of my hand, eyes that opened and didn't focus, a day of confusion and tests and cautious optimism from the medical team. By the end of that week, he was breathing on his own, reduced support, still in the ICU, but moving in the right direction. The doctor used the word remarkable, and I held on to it like something precious. The first morning he was lucid enough to really see me. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You came." "Of course I came," I said. He looked around the room. My mother was there. My brother was there. There was a quality to how he looked at them that I don't have the right word for. Not accusation, not forgiveness. Something more careful than either. He looked back at me. "The roses," he said. His voice was rough. The ventilator had done a number on his throat. "They're okay," I said. "I watered them." He closed his eyes. "There are things I still don't know how to feel about. My mother, who is not a bad person but made a terrible choice. My brother, who is not cruel but let someone else carry everything that was hard. The version of family I grew up believing in versus the version I drove back to find in that unlocked house. What I know is this. Someone had to be there. Someone had to sit in the chair and hold his hand and talk to the doctor and ask the right questions. Someone had to make sure the nurses knew his name, and the patient in room 7 wasn't just a chart on a board. I was the someone. I don't say that looking for credit. I say it because I think about all the people in all the hospital rooms where there is no someone, where the chair beside the bed stays empty, where the only voice is the sound of monitors. Before I left for Portland, my father transferred to a step-down unit, improving steadily, already arguing with the nurses about the food. I went to the house one more time, watered the roses, sat in his reading chair, found the book he'd left face down on the armrest, and carefully folded the corner of the page so he wouldn't lose his place. Then I found an envelope on the kitchen table with my name on it in his handwriting. He must have written it sometime in the days before the heart attack during some quiet evening I hadn't been there for. Inside was a note. 3 lines, the handwriting a little shaky the way his had gotten in the last couple of years. I know what you do for this family. I have always known. I'm sorry we don't say it more. Daddy folded it and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket and pressed my hand against it for a moment. Then I locked the door behind me. Both the deadbolt, and the chain, and the little brass hook and eye latch that serves no structural purpose. And I drove back to Portland.